The return of Capella Emerada Lugunica is exactly what the government wants you to look at, because while the Sin Archbishop of Lust is making big moves, the real threat is hiding in plain sight. While the story wants us to obsess over Capella and her beloved children, it's conveniently utilizing misdirection like a magician distracting from the big trick. We're continually told that the beloved children and the archbishops are the greatest threat to the kingdom, but what if they're actually their greatest tool? Today, let's dive into the conspiracy of the Kingdom of Lugunica. First, let's take a step back and examine what the hell is going on. Reeling from the events of Arc 9, our protagonist Natsuki Subaru seeks information from Roy Alfred, Sin Archbishop of Gluttony, in hopes of restoring the lost memories and names of many of our companions. At the same time, the Church of the Divine Dragon, a religious organization that prioritizes the Covenant formed with the Kingdom and the Divine Dragon Volcanica, finally sticks its neck into international affairs. They don't normally do this, opting to stay out of the nation's politics, but after the damage done by the witch cult throughout the past few years, and namely, the battle for Pristella, they have decided to change their approach, bringing in a sacrament that can allegedly undo the effects of an authority or a curse, and bearing their saintess Falore, who just so happens to match the description and name of the abducted royal from 15 years prior, and while this is ongoing, Capella's faction are also seemingly making their own moves. They are alleged to be replacing critical members of the nation's politics with body doubles and instigating conflicts with one Natsuki Subaru, bringing up his strangely close relationship with the witch cult and his convenient timing to throw suspicion on him and take him out of the picture, pointing to impossible to explain contrivances such as his battle against the White Whale and his invisible ability that just so happens to map one-to-one to the Sin Archbishop of Sloth. To put it bluntly, the kingdom is thrown into disarray. Accusations of treason, murder mysteries unraveling, and for some reason, Roy Alfred is dead? There's a whole lot going on, and it is constantly reinforced by the narrative that this is the happening of the witch cult, mentions of buzzwords such as pride, constant references to Capella and her power, and the introduction of her beloved children that we verifiably see making moves in Arc 10 Phase 2, as Clarissa starts to attack Subaru and his group in the sewers of the kingdom. I have to ask though, doesn't it all seem a little too convenient? When all these different forces are at play, Capella just so happens to be behind all of them. Russell Fellow, a member of the Lugunican state, also keeps backing up this interpretation. The Six Tongues, an intelligence agency of the kingdom, has been in an underground war with the beloved children for years allegedly, so it can be seen as tensions boiling, but I think that this is a misdirection, a red herring that the author is so fond of doing. He loves heavily leaning in one direction, using unreliable narrators or straight-up liars to give you the impression that something is the case before pulling the rug out from under you, and I think cleverly, Tape is also using the visual novel Steam game to do this. To the uninitiated, the plot of Arc 10 is strangely similar to a ReZero video game released in 2021, 5 years before Arc 10 even started. In it, a 6th royal candidate is introduced, just like Arc 10. There was also a nun of the Divine Dragon Church, and just like Arc 10, her and her comrades were once victims of Mother, or Capella, and her influence hangs over the narrative. Sounds familiar. The obvious question would become, why would Tape repeat the same narrative bar for bar 5 years later? Well, that's the thing. I don't think he necessarily is, and that much is clear by Melty, the 6th candidate in the game, having a much different role in the novel so far. Tape, being a human being with his own brain, is very aware that people already know about Prophecy of the Throne, and he's writing with that knowledge in mind. While the narration and characters constantly keeps pointing fingers at Capella and her involvement, so too does the meta-narrative of ReZero, as it's being carefully threaded with the explicit knowledge of Capella's involvement in a different version of these characters. It's another way to bury the lead, to obstruct the truth of the mystery of ReZero's 10th arc. Now, this isn't to say I don't think Capella is involved. We saw Clarissa in that sewer, and if what we hear is true, that she's one of the beloved children, which I have no reason to doubt at this point, then clearly she's up to something, and I do think that Russell Fellow is telling the truth when he mentions some of these things about their battle with Capella, but let's ponder something. What is the best kind of lie? One that has a nugget of truth in it. Capella is surely involved in some regard, but what about the Church of the Divine Dragon? What about the most nefarious third player? We'll get to them later, but let's briefly examine the Church. To anyone in the kingdom, Falore's appearance as a royal would be readily apparent, perhaps even her name would be, but that's just speculation. Yet, the Church kept her in their back pocket. For what purpose? The members of the Church also keep Falore on a tight leash. She's an eccentric, exceptionally eager to help people, but has to be continually reined in by those around her, and a lot of her decisions to help people are made by sneaking away from her handlers. There's also an obvious play made by going to offer Krush help first, her campaign being centered around breaking away from the Divine Dragon that the Church holds as a godlike figure, and healing her effectively destroys her campaign. Was this a conscious decision by the Church, or can we believe that they wanted to demonstrate their capabilities to save the people of Pristella? There have assuredly been national tragedies in the past caused by the witch cult, so what about Pristella in particular caused them to move? Is it a link to Capella showing herself, or something else? Is it maybe just because it's such a big attack? Is it a coincidence that at the same time the church makes themselves known in the capital, Roy Alfred is seemingly killed? Are characters like Tiga and Sakura in on the conspiracy against Natsuki Subaru, given how it was seemingly pointing towards Tiga being the one to kill the unconscious Subaru? There are a lot of questions about the Church of the Divine Dragon, some with partial answers that we must question the validity of, and to be honest, I don't have many answers myself. I simply think that we shouldn't let our guard down around them because of Capella, and it isn't just them, but Lugunica itself should be questioned. Now, you see, as an American, I've heard a thing or two about intelligence agencies. A few assassination attempts here and there, a few coups against democratically elected governments, some false flag operations here and there to attack our own country. The second I heard about the Six Tongues way back when, I had immediate red flags in my mind. Formed in the immediate aftermath of the demi-human civil war, the Six Tongues achieved their aims of national security through subterfuge, manipulation, and counterintelligence. To juxtapose the public-facing Council of Wise Men, they are a shady group of people willing to use any means necessary to secure Lugunica national interests, and well, that's where my suspicions lie. I'm not really one to trust a CIA agent, frankly. When discussing an intelligence agency that works to preserve national interests, you start to think about one thing, and then another, and another. I initially theorized this at the end of Phase 1, so unfortunately my video is a little bit late to the party, and I'm sure quite a few people are suspicious of Russell by now due to his behavior in Phase 2, but when you examine the happenings of Arc 10 so far through a lens of defending Lugunica, a lot of it starts to make a lot of sense really fast. Would Capella have a goal that involves destabilizing Lugunica? Possibly, but we don't know. We know some of what her character motivations boil down to, her desire to be loved by all, but what Capella herself is setting out to achieve, well, we just don't know. Would the Dragon Church have a goal that involves destabilizing Lugunica? We don't know. We can infer that based on their faith in the dragon, it's unlikely, but not impossible. The next question is, would Russell have a goal that involves destabilizing Lugunica? Well, also no. But rather than thinking of it as destabilizing Lugunica, we can think of it as an ends justify the means mentality. While Lugunica may experience hardship now, it is a decisive action that will benefit it in the long run. In 1962, the US government had an Operation Northwoods. The Department of Defense and the CIA proposed that they could stage false flag attacks on US soil, staging terrorist attacks on both military and civilian targets in order to blame them on the Cuban government as a form to justify war against Cuba. Even though these departments of the government were vested in the national interests of the United States, they were willing to harm the nation and the people in it for what they perceived to be long-term gain. For Lugunica, what they seek to protect is the status quo of the nation. In their current state, they are potentially the most powerful they have ever been. A history filled with civil wars and skirmishes with neighboring nations like Wallachia, all ended by the covenant with the Divine Dragon and the reign of the Sword Saint. The people at the top also benefit from what seems to be exceptionally powerful military forces, and I'm sure there are some economic ties in there. This, coupled with the two aforementioned aspects, seems to paint Lugunica in the position of being the global superpower, with the Divine Dragon being the equivalent of a nuclear bomb, as it's repeatedly stated that true dragons in the ReZero world are unbelievably powerful entities, and Volcanica is seemingly on an even higher level among them. The impetus for many events of the story of ReZero is the royal selection. Following the death of the royal family, the Dragon History Stone that tells the future of the kingdom initiated an election between 5 candidates chosen by a gem. All of these candidates come from many different walks of life: poverty, the anti-nuclear weapon camp, capitalist filth, minority groups, and the one chosen by God. Almost every single candidate is moved against at once in Arc 10, as they all represent unique threats to the status quo of Lugunica national security. Emilia is a kind-hearted person, someone not willing to make the decisions necessary to continue the reign of an empire. Obviously, she's also a silver-haired half-elf, a target of immense discrimination due to her similarity to the Witch of Envy in Lugunica. Cruz Karsten does not agree with the Dragon Covenant that the kingdom holds with Volcanica, wanting the nation to be able to stand on its own 2 feet by dissolving the covenant. This is the equivalent of being the only nation in the world with nuclear weapons and opting to dismantle them. Of course, a state is going to reject this concept. Felt, even though she is allegedly a lost royal, is vehemently anti-establishment. Her main campaign promise is one that dissolves the status quo entirely, since she has seen and lived the experience of the downtrodden firsthand, basically uprooting not just national security from the government's perspective, but also threatening market interests and undercutting the profit motive. Anastasia is not under any active attacks, though I think it would be an easy to attack her considering that she's from another country, and in the side story Lugunican papers we see people speculating on if she's a spy from Kararagi. She's just not in the arc, however, so unless she comes in later, maybe the government just doesn't care about her, I don't know. But I think it would be a really cool metaphor for a couple of things in real life, namely devout politicians who will violate religious precedent and expectation. In our case, the reverence to the dragon and therefore respect for the stone and its wishes, in order to maintain power. Any government, any state, has its own self-interests. You might be thinking I'm talking about, being captured by corporations or religious institutions, but that's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to the state as its own entity, and like any entity, self-preservation will always come up, even if it's something that seems at odds with ideology. The state must generate tax revenue. The state has a vested interest in maintaining some level of infrastructure for the prosperity of its people, as well as market incentive. The state must enforce things like private property. The state must keep up a veneer of fairness to keep people complacent. In ReZero's case, the state has a vested interest in maintaining the covenant. Because of these natural correcting forces, anyone in charge, regardless of philosophy, ideology, or religious affiliation, will be fundamentally constrained by the structure of the state and its self-preservation. So when I mention how the Lugunican government is seemingly acting against the wishes of the Dragon History Stone, and by extension the dragon it holds in so much esteem, it isn't out of an ideological conflict with the dragon or the covenant. It's to keep the state's blood pumping and to make moves against, from the government's perspective, radical actors that are threatening to take the reins of the nation. That is why I see there is a possibility that the Six Tongues, this intelligence agency, would act against the dragon. Once leadership or legislation begins to threaten to rock the boat and attack the core foundations of the state's existence, the state's survival instinct will kick in, and it will force compromises in beliefs and values in order to ultimately maintain the status quo. I think it's very probable that Capella or the witch cult are up to something. I also think it's possible that the church is up to something, but not enough fingers are pointed at the government itself, who has the biggest motivation of all for this sequence of events. I like the repeated mentions in Arc 10 of Subaru's frustration that this whole Falori nonsense could undermine all of the candidates' efforts, and now he's working with Russell Fellow, a man who moved on Felix the nanosecond he was no longer affiliated with Krush, the man who couldn't pass the gate check quick enough and immediately staged a collision between carts that injured innocent civilians so that he could sneak through. The man who was utilizing an unknown power through White Sheep to keep the people around him in check. Arc 10 is parallel slop. But goddamn do I love some parallel slop, okay? It's a continuous reference to Arc 9. A seeming betrayal of Subaru at the end of Phase 1. Natsuki Subaru and Aldebaran being branded traitors. Natsuki Subaru suffered an injury to his left arm, just like Aldebaran. Subaru making use of a totally legally distinct territory that guarantees him victory. Roy Alford is in play in some fashion. Yes, I don't think he's dead, we'll get to that later. A band of misfits that continues to grow larger that contains a looper, the looper's best ally, a person wielding dragon powers, and someone connected to nobility who grapples with those expectations. We also have a child with their whole life ahead of them, seemingly has it cut short by unforeseen circumstances caused by the arc. I'm sure there are many more details, but I won't bore you with them. The arcs very, very clearly foil one another. They are following a somewhat close sequence of events, some of them being almost direct mirrors to one another. Now, if I may, I would like to say something possibly out of pocket. If Aldebaran was an antagonist to the Emilia camp in Arc 9, then who would be the analog in Arc 10? Well, I'm sure you're assuming I'm going to say Russell, and that's partially true. I think the role of Aldebaran has been kind of spread out throughout the antagonists of Arc 10. For Capella, well, we would have to circle back to Arc 5. In it, Aldebaran and Capella actually fight, and for a while I wasn't sure what thematic purpose this fight served, besides to dive into Aldebaran, but it makes a lot of sense for me now. Aldebaran is someone who feels like he isn't himself. He's struggled with his identity for seemingly his whole life, constantly compared to and contrasted with Natsuki Subaru, molded to be someone he isn't, failing the people he loved in his life and being sent 400 years into the future with no pieces left to pick up. His entire life basically atomized. He has no strong sense of identity, having given up 10 years prior to the main story and now wearing a helmet that even takes away from something so simple that hides his identity because he doesn't feel like he has one. Why show his face when he feels like he's nobody? Capella can look like anything she wants. A character who wants to be loved by everyone, a character who is of the belief that people are only after surface level looks and beauty when it comes to love. From her perspective, something ugly should be thrown away. The ability to transfigure yourself into something beautiful to be deserving of love is extremely similar to Aldebaran in his rejection of his own identity. Her face is a blank slate that can be made into anything, while his is a canvas of cold, dark steel that shut itself from the outside. Both of them address what the pressure of expectation could lead to, as Capella steps on Krush while ranting about the expectations of the feminine form, and how one can never escape the gaze of others due to being a woman. Of course, they're coming at this toxic expectation and lack of identity from two different angles, but still a parallel can be drawn. For Russell, I think of a few things. Aldebaran was a very ends justify the means type of guy. His relative disinterest in the attack of the Watergate city of Priscilla in Season 3, because, well, as long as Priscilla was safe, that's all that mattered. He was killing the Council of 10 because he didn't want the Sin Archbishops to get a hold of them. He opened the floodgates, which probably hurt or killed people, but ultimately they came out on top. Then in Arc 9, he changed his no-kill rule as long as the killing only happened in a discarded loop. Additionally, both Russell and Aldebaran are powerful, but not outwardly. Al is a looper, which is exceptionally strong in its own right, and he has a vast knowledge base of magic that he isn't really capable of making use of. He's massively limited by his otherwise ordinary body, and without the ability to loop would essentially get mogged by many combatants. Russell has not demonstrated any physical capabilities either, but he does have the entire force of an intelligence agency behind him and is fully willing to manipulate people and make threats in order to get what he wants. Aldebaran would leverage Heinkel's desire for dragon's blood and Ye's desire to see him die to get him to do things. Russell, though not explicitly confirmed, seemingly showed up at Reinhardt's house when he was just a kid and told him, "Hey kid, if you care about your family, lock the fuck in and serve the kingdom." Now this is where Roy Alfred comes into play. I do not believe Roy Alfred is dead. One, because I think that would be an exceptionally stupid writing decision, but second, because his Arc 10 parallel slop has not come into play yet. He came to an understanding of his siblings and their desired meals in Arc 9, if I'm remembering correctly. Sorry, I don't really want to go through Arc 9 again. If he's dead now, Roy will have actually lost all of his character progression. So here's what I think. In Arc 9, Aldebaran forced Roy to comply with him by carving a curse mark into him that he will only eat and vomit up what Aldebaran wants him to. He became a key piece, and many of Aldebaran's victories, if we want to call them that, Roy is gone. And who would have taken advantage of the commotion in the capital? Well, basically every antagonistic force, but we already know of Russell using curse marks on people. In Riot in Flanders, we see him doing just that. And it's implied, though not confirmed, he's also using a similar mechanism to make White Sheep and Black Dog comply with his orders and keep them under control. The CIA had MK Ultra, which was meant to give them memory manipulation and coercion. What if Russell, he was like, oh, I want my own fucking MK Ultra, and he has a cursed-marked Roy Alfred in his fucking basement. Can I prove this? No, not at all. The only argument I would be able to make is that somehow someone got into the prison tower with no issue and no fight and then killed Roy. That person would most likely have to be someone within the Lugunican government, but, you never know. This is my theory on how Russell is probably in some ways a bad guy, even if he's not the bad guy. What about Capella and the church? What are their goals? Well, the possibly disappointing part is, I don't know. I have no theories or ideas for what these two groups would be up to. If you guys have any ideas, even if they clash with mine, I would love to hear them in the comments, so please do let me know. In my personal opinion, I think it would be pretty boring if everything in Arc 10 is indeed the fault of Capella and the beloved children. I love the concept of this arc, having multiple antagonistic forces, since it makes the world feel so gigantic and alive, with multiple people taking advantage of the chaos for their own independent goals. It kind of sounds like in this video I'm blaming everything on Russell, and I wouldn't blame you for thinking that, but I also don't think he should be solely responsible for everything, even if I would find that more interesting than Capella. Perhaps there are even elements of truth in what he tells Subaru and Betty about people being replaced, but honestly, I'm not even sure Miklatov was one of them. Maybe that's a discussion for another day, though. I wouldn't be surprised if I end up mostly wrong, and Russell, well, he's kind of sort of evil, but he's not one of the big bads. You guys know me at this point, okay? Globe theory, artificial observers, Flugel moon theory, now the Lugunican conspiracy theory. I just start typing shit and we go from there. I always like to think that I'm cooking on a theory when I'm typing, and I just think, like, dude, I'm typing some crazy shit right now. Do you guys think there's any chance in hell that this is possible? Am I onto something? Have I lost my mind yet again? I guess we'll find out soon, because Phase 3 probably starts a couple weeks from now. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe for more. You can also check the description down below to become a member, which gives you benefits like early videos, membership badges, and cool custom emotes. You can join the Discord where we talk about ReZero, Kagurabachi, Jujutsu Kaisen, and all kind of stuff. Additionally, you can go to the channel store and pick up some awesome stickers made by our channel artist, so you can carry the power of Graphia with you on your water bottle. That's about it though. Thank you for watching. See ya.